In a room where fortunes were sealed over a single glass of wine, one forgotten waitress was about to rewrite the fate of the man who destroyed her family. If you want more powerful stories like this, remember to subscribe so you never miss a moment that will stay with you forever. The Sterling Room had a way of swallowing sound. Even the clink of crystal glasses seemed muted under its high coffered ceilings, as if the chandeliers themselves demanded reverence. The golden light washed over white tablecloths, over the gleam of silver cutlery polished to a mirror's shine. It was the kind of place where you didn't need to ask for the check because if you had to ask, you didn't belong here. For the past 3 years, Maya Johnson had belonged here, and yet she was invisible. At 28, she moved like a shadow between the tables, her black hair pulled neatly into a low bun, the pressed white shirt and black vest of her uniform tailored to perfection. Her skin carried the warm, deep brown of her West African heritage, but her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, missed nothing. To the clientele of the Sterling Room, she was just another face in the symphony of service. They didn't know she had once been the brightest star in Columbia University's International Finance program. They didn't know she'd been 2 semesters from graduating when a single phone call had turned her life inside out. Her mother, Angela Johnson, had been the CEO of a small but thriving water filtration company, a proud inventor whose work promised affordable clean water for rural towns and struggling neighborhoods. That day, Maya had been in the campus library preparing for a midterm when the news broke. Blackwell Capital acquires Johnson Aquatech in surprise sale. By the time she reached her mother's office in Queens, the deal had closed. Her mother, pale and trembling, had signed under the pressure of a collapsing stock value engineered by market forces no one could quite explain. That night, Angela Johnson suffered a stroke. The bills had followed: hospital stays, specialist care, physical therapy. Columbia's tuition notices had been replaced with final warnings, then debt collection letters. And when the family's modest home was sold, Maya packed her things and became the Sterling Room's most overqualified waitress. She didn't speak of any of this to her colleagues. She kept her head down. She was the ghost of Park Row, gliding between tables with an air of unshakable calm, even when her chest ached with memories. Tonight, though, the air was different. "Maya," the maitre d' Dubois called softly from the podium. His French accent was a silk ribbon over steel. "Table 12, VIP. I trust you'll handle it with discretion." Table 12 was not just any table. It was one of the coveted corner alcoves, screened with tall palms for privacy. She had served senators there, hedge fund titans, and once an actor whose scandal had made headlines for weeks. But when she saw who was being escorted to the plush leather banquette, the air left her lungs. Harrison Blackwell. He was taller than she remembered from the newspaper photos. His silvering hair swept back from a broad forehead, the custom charcoal suit fitting him like it had been stitched to his skin. His presence drew a subtle shift in the room, the way other tables seemed to angle slightly toward him, as if power had its own gravity. Behind him trailed Graham Vance, his chief investment officer, younger, sharper at the edges, and perpetually on the verge of a smirk. She didn't need Dubois to tell her this was high stakes. She didn't need a menu to know that her hands were trembling just slightly as she approached with the water jug. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice perfectly level. "Still or sparkling?" Harrison gave her a distracted nod, already scanning the menu. "Sparkling." As she poured, Graham leaned toward Harrison. "Shall we switch to German?" The words, casual to anyone else, made Maya's spine stiffen. She had spent years buried in academic texts, studying the financial markets of Europe. German had been her second major language, polished to fluency by 2 summer internships in Frankfurt. And now, she heard every syllable. Harrison's voice lowered. "Project Sonnenwende. The lawyers confirmed the acquisitions are on track. By the end of the quarter, Johnson Aquatech's patents will be worthless to anyone but us. Project Solstice. The name sliced through her like glass. She kept her expression perfectly neutral as she placed the sparkling water on the table. Graham chuckled in German. Angela Johnson never saw it coming. Shame about her health, though I suppose stress will do that to a person. The floor under her feet seemed to tilt. She wanted to throw the water in his face. She wanted to scream. But the years had taught her that anger was a luxury she could not afford. Not here, not now. Instead, she nodded politely and stepped back, letting their words fill the space between her heartbeats. So it was them. The Sterling room carried on as if nothing had shifted. Glasses clinked, cutlery sang against porcelain. Somewhere near the grand piano, a jazz standard curled through the air like smoke. But at table 12, two men were speaking the language of arrogance, believing their words were locked away behind the fortress of a foreign tongue. Maya understood every syllable, and for the first time in years, she felt something awaken in her chest. Not just the ache of loss, but the sharp, cold spark of purpose. The Sterling room was designed for discretion. Conversations that would change markets, topple political campaigns, or shape the future of entire industries had been conducted here, sealed between the clink of crystal and the whisper of starched linen. Tonight, at table 12, the world might not have known it yet, but one of those conversations was happening right under Maya Johnson's watch. She moved toward the table with a tray balanced on her palm, her steps slow and measured, every motion a calculated mask. Inside, her pulse was quick, sharp as a snare drum. The scent of roasted duck with cherry glaze drifted from the kitchen pass, but to Maya, the only thing she could smell was adrenaline. Harrison Blackwell sat angled slightly toward Graham Vance, his posture both relaxed and commanding. His long fingers rested on the stem of a wine glass, swirling a deep garnet Bordeaux in lazy circles. Graham leaned in, his voice pitched low in a German so casual, so confident, it was as though he believed the language itself was a velvet curtain, shielding them from any unwelcome ears. To anyone else in the room, it might have been meaningless sound. To Maya, it was a direct line into the heart of the people who had dismantled her life. We'll wrap the acquisitions in the Cayman subsidiary. The patents will transfer without triggering an SEC review. Harrison's tone carried the smugness of a man who had navigated too many gray areas of the law and knew exactly how much he could get away with. Graham smirked. And Johnson Aquatech. By the end of the month, we'll bury the filtration tech under Solstice's branding. Angela Johnson's work will vanish like it never existed. Her mother's name landed like a gunshot in her chest. It was one thing to know Harrison Blackwell was behind the corporate raid. It was another to hear him, in his own voice, detail the strategy, casually, over sparkling water and a bottle of wine that cost more than Maya's monthly rent. She steadied her hand as she set down their appetizer plates. Foie gras with fig compote, each portion a delicate sculpture under the Sterling room's warm light. Danke, Graham murmured automatically, his eyes never rising to meet hers. The irony was almost unbearable. He thanked her in German, not realizing she could dismantle every word they had said since sitting down. She straightened, allowing herself the smallest pause, enough to catch the next exchange. What about the whistleblower? Graham asked. Harrison's laugh was short, derisive. Dealt with. Everyone has a price, or a secret. Her mind raced. A whistleblower? Someone inside Blackwell Capital had tried to fight back. She needed a name. She needed proof. Maya stepped back toward the service station, her tray now empty, her breathing carefully controlled. She kept her eyes on the gleaming brass coffee machine in front of her, but her ears stayed tuned to table 12. Years of working this job had taught her to navigate the room without appearing to listen, and tonight, every inch of that skill mattered. Across the dining room, Dubois was managing the arrival of a senator's entourage, a perfect distraction that meant no one was paying much attention to her. Harrison's voice carried faintly through the soft hum of conversation. Project Solstice will close in weeks. The patents are the jewel, but the name, Solstice, will be remembered. People forget small inventors. They remember brands. Graham chuckled again, swirling his wine. Angela Johnson thought she was building a legacy. Turns out, she built our next bonus pool. Maya's fingers curled against her thigh until her nails pressed into her skin. The room felt warmer now, though she knew it was her own blood rushing hot under the surface. She pictured her mother's hands, long, graceful fingers stained with ink from sketching designs late into the night, the pride in her eyes when she tested the first working prototype. Those hands now trembled when they lifted a coffee cup. That was Harrison's legacy. She forced herself to keep moving, refill Table 5's water glasses, deliver the rare filet mignon to Table 9. Each step kept her anchored to the present, even as her mind pieced together fragments of the conversation into a picture she could barely stand to look at. A sudden burst of laughter from Table 12 drew her back. She turned her head just enough to catch Harrison lifting his glass toward Graham. To Solstice, and to the fools who never saw it coming. She caught the faintest echo of the word Naren, fools, and something inside her locked into place. This wasn't just business to them. This was sport. Maya approached their table again with the poise of a woman who had done this 1,000 times. "Would you care for another bottle, sir?" she asked in English, her voice a soft, professional murmur. Harrison looked up at her for the first time that evening, the kind of look that assessed a person's worth in under 2 seconds. "This one's fine," he said, dismissive, before turning back to Graham. The rejection didn't matter. The fact that he had looked into her face did, because when the time came, and it would, she wanted him to remember her eyes. She retreated once more, her mind a tight coil of strategy. They thought they were speaking in code. They thought she was nothing but a background detail, a vessel to carry their plates and refill their glasses. They had no idea that she had just heard enough to dismantle everything they were building. In that moment, under the glittering chandeliers of the Sterling Room, Maya Johnson made a silent promise. She would not let Project Solstice bury her mother's work. She would not let these men's arrogance write the final chapter of Angela Johnson's life. But promises were not enough. She needed a plan. As she polished silverware at the service station, her mind sifted through possibilities. She had contacts from her Columbia days, professors who specialized in corporate ethics, a classmate now working for a data journalism startup. There were ways to follow the money, to track the shell companies Harrison had just bragged about. But she needed hard evidence, something that would survive a courtroom, and she needed to stay invisible just a little longer. From the corner of her eye, she saw Graham check his watch. They were winding down. Soon they would leave the Sterling Room, confident their conversation had been nothing more than background noise in a sea of luxury. Maya knew better. As she prepared their dessert, dark chocolate soufflé with Grand Marnier creme, she allowed herself a single, fleeting smile. She didn't have all the pieces yet, but she had the opening move. And in any game, the opening move set the tone for everything that followed. When she returned to their table, she placed the soufflé before Harrison with a steady hand. "Enjoy," she said, the word carrying more weight in her mind than they could imagine. He didn't notice. Not yet. But soon, Harrison Blackwell would learn that the language of arrogance had its consequences. The Sterling Room's dining floor was a ballet of precision, servers gliding past one another without collision, sommeliers bending at the waist to pour, the soft rustle of napkins unfolding like whispers. To the casual eye, Maya Johnson was just another dancer in the ensemble, her movements rehearsed, her expression neutral. But inside, a storm gathered, steady and deliberate, drawing strength from every word she had overheard. She kept her back to Table 12 for as long as possible, polishing cutlery at the side station. It wasn't avoidance, it was strategy. If she lingered too close, she might catch another careless remark. And she wasn't sure she could keep the fury from showing in her face. The words, Angela Johnson and bonus pool, still scraped like grit against her chest. But as she refolded a crisp linen napkin, the sound of Graham's voice, low, oily, cut through the ambient hum of the room. He'd switched back to English now, perhaps thinking the sensitive part of their conversation had concluded. "Have you seen the projections for the next quarter?" Graham asked, his tone one of smug inevitability. "Solstice will clear $50 million in profit before we even touch the secondary patents." Harrison gave a dry laugh. $50 million is just the beginning. Once we start licensing, those filtration systems will be in every municipal contract from Boston to Los Angeles, and no one will remember Johnson Aquatech. We'll own the narrative. Maya's hands froze on the napkin. Own the narrative. That was it, the way men like Harrison operated. They didn't just take assets. They rewrote the story so the victim disappeared entirely. She set the napkin aside and took a slow breath, forcing herself back into motion. She had to stay invisible for now. A party at table 5 signaled for more wine, giving her an excuse to move. As she passed table 12, she let her peripheral vision capture every detail. The loosened knot of Graham's tie, the faint sheen of wine across Harrison's lip, the black leather briefcase under the table, its clasp slightly ajar. She noted all of it, locking it away in the meticulous filing system of her mind. While she poured the Bordeaux at table 5, her thoughts looped back to the last 3 years. Her mother's collapse, the endless stream of medical bills, the way friends had stopped calling because they didn't know what to say. She thought of the countless nights she'd sat beside her mother's hospital bed, reading aloud from the technical journals Angela loved, even when she wasn't strong enough to hold them. And she remembered the exact moment she'd learned German could be more than an academic exercise. A summer in Frankfurt, negotiating a student housing contract with a landlord who had underestimated her. She'd seen then how language could shift the balance of power. Tonight, she'd felt that shift again. Only this time the stakes were life's work, dignity, and justice. By the time she returned to the service station, Harrison and Graham had moved on to lighter topics, real estate in the Hamptons, a new restaurant opening in Tribeca, but their earlier words still pulsed in her ears. Then Graham said something that made her stomach clench. "We should finalize the Cayman transfers next week. I'll have legal draw up the final shell agreements." Harrison nodded. "Do it quietly. No emails, face-to-face only. And make sure Dubois doesn't seat anyone we don't know within earshot." Maya realized then that Harrison trusted the Sterling Room as much as he trusted his own boardroom. The irony made her want to laugh, a bitter, hollow sound she couldn't allow to escape. She had no illusions. Confronting Harrison head-on tonight would be suicide for her job and her chance at gathering real evidence. But something had shifted deep inside her. Until now, survival had meant endurance, keeping her head down, making it to the end of each shift, paying one more medical bill. But tonight, survival meant something else. Action. The soufflé plates were cleared, and Dubois approached the table with the ease of a man who had managed the city's most powerful egos for decades. "Will there be anything else for you, gentlemen?" "Just the check," Harrison said. Maya took that as her cue, approaching with the black leather folio. She placed it gently on the table, her fingers brushing the edge of Graham's briefcase as she set it down. It was a calculated accident, just enough to nudge it slightly, revealing a glimpse of paper inside. She caught the faint lettering at the top, Solstice Holdings Limited. It was all she could do to keep her pulse from spiking. Harrison signed without looking at her, sliding the folio back with a tip so generous it could almost be considered insulting. Money as dismissal. money as erasure. "Enjoy your evening," Maya said, her voice as smooth as the linen on the tables. They left without another glance in her direction, striding toward the door under the halo of the Sterling room's golden lights. Only when the heavy glass doors closed behind them did she allow herself to exhale. The adrenaline that had kept her movements precise now flooded her limbs, leaving them trembling with the force of everything she'd held back. She busied herself clearing their table, but her mind was far from the dining room. She replayed every word, every expression, the weight of their laughter when they spoke of her mother as though she were a footnote. Maya didn't yet know how she would do it, but she knew this. She wouldn't let Project Solstice succeed without a fight, and she would make sure Harrison Blackwell never forgot that the ghost of Park Row had been listening. She caught her reflection in the mirrored column by the bar. The uniform, the bun, the practiced neutrality, all the camouflage she'd worn for years. But beneath it, she saw something else. A spark. Small, maybe, but impossible to extinguish now. That spark carried her through the rest of the shift, through the post-service polish and the soft clatter of cutlery being stacked. When she finally stepped out into the cool night air of Park Row, the city lights stretched before her like a challenge. She pulled her coat tighter, her breath clouding in the early spring chill, and started walking. Not home, not yet. She had someone to find, someone who could tell her more about that whistleblower Harrison had mentioned. The street hummed with the muted roar of traffic, taxis slicing through the dark, streetlights casting pools of yellow on the wet pavement. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the thrum of the subway underfoot. For the first time in years, Maya didn't feel like she was drifting. She was moving toward something. And she knew exactly whose empire she planned to burn down. The hum of Park Row faded behind her as Maya walked deeper into the city, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. It wasn't raining anymore, but the streets glistened under the sodium glow of the lamps, reflecting fragments of the world above, shards of light on dark asphalt, much like the fragments of her own life. She didn't remember making the decision to head toward the East River. Her feet simply took her there, past shuttered storefronts and the occasional 24-hour bodega spilling neon into the night. The closer she got to the water, the more the air changed. Salted, cold, tinged with the metallic scent of the docks. The image of Harrison Blackwell leaning back in his chair, wine glass in hand, replayed over and over in her mind. The way Graham had said her mother's name, Angela Johnson, like it was a punchline in a joke only they understood. The streetlights blurred for a moment, and she realized her eyes were wet. She brushed the tears away quickly, irritated with herself. Not here. Not now. But once she reached the bench overlooking the dark stretch of the river, she sat down, letting the night hold her in its quiet. And the memories came as sharp and unyielding as the wind. It had been a Tuesday. She'd been in the library at Columbia, halfway through a macroeconomics case study, when her phone rang. Her mother's assistant, voice shaking, told her to come to the office right away. Something about a stock collapse. By the time Maya arrived in Queens, the boardroom was empty except for her mother. Angela was sitting at the head of the long walnut table, her usually flawless posture slumped, a document lying open before her. The Blackwell Capital logo glared up from the header. "They forced me," Angela had whispered when Maya stepped closer. Her hand, those hands that had built filtration prototypes from scratch, was trembling as it clutched the pen. "They tanked the share value, leaked false reports about faulty units. I couldn't protect the patents without risking bankruptcy. They gave me no choice." Maya remembered how cold her mother's skin felt when she reached across the table to take her hand. "We'll fight this," she'd said, her voice fierce. But Angela had only shaken her head. "You don't understand. They've already signed it through. By morning it will be theirs." That was when her mother's eyes had gone wide, not with fear, but with pain. She collapsed before Maya could get another word out. The ambulance ride, the sterile rush of the emergency room, the sound of the monitors, it all blurred together. When the doctor emerged, his expression was grim. A severe ischemic stroke. She would live, but she would never be the same. The memory loosened something deep inside Maya's chest, and she doubled forward on the bench, pressing her palms against her knees until her breathing steadied. She had tried to bury these images for years, folding them neatly into the back of her mind so she could keep moving. But hearing Harrison gloat had torn the stitches out of all those old wounds. She had done everything right after the stroke, dropped out of school to take 2 jobs, learned how to lift her mother from the bed to the chair without hurting her shoulders, found a way to pay for her physical therapy even when the insurance cut off. She'd told herself over and over that keeping the lights on and the rent paid was winning in its own way. But tonight, she saw it for what it was: survival, not justice. And survival wasn't enough anymore. A shiver ran through her, but it wasn't from the cold. It was the slow, deliberate crystallizing of intent. She wasn't going to just keep her head down and hope fate was kind. She was going to pull Project Solstice into the light and make sure everyone saw exactly what Harrison Blackwell had done. The question was how. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket, startling her. It was a text from her old Columbia classmate Daniel Vega, now a junior data analyst at an investigative news outlet. "Still alive?" he'd written, the kind of casual check-in that came once or twice a year. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed back, "I have something you need to hear, but not over text." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Her plan began to take rough shape as she walked back toward the subway. She would need to get close to Graham or Harrison again, close enough to see documents, maybe even photograph them. She'd have to play the part she'd perfected, the unremarkable, attentive server. Only this time, she'd be hunting. The next morning, the city's usual chaos greeted her at the Sterling Room. Deliveries clanged into the kitchen through the service entrance, the scent of fresh bread filling the prep area. Dubois was already in the dining room, making minute adjustments to table settings with the precision of a surgeon. "Maya," he said without looking up. "Table 12 again tonight. Our guests were pleased yesterday." The words made her skin prickle. Pleased. Of course they were pleased. They believed they'd conducted their little conspiracy in complete privacy. "Understood," she replied, her voice a perfect mask. As she polished the silver and checked the crystal for smudges, she could feel the tight coil of resolve winding tighter inside her. She wasn't afraid of seeing Harrison again. In fact, she wanted it. She wanted him to keep talking. She wanted him to underestimate her just one more time. By the time the dinner service began, she'd rehearsed every detail of her composure, the precise arc of her pour when refilling water, the way her gaze would pass over him without lingering. Just another night in a world where she was no one important. But behind the stillness, her mind was mapping every move. When Harrison walked in, Graham at his side, she noted the leather briefcase was back. She caught Dubois's discreet nod, "Treat them like royalty." As she approached the table, Graham smirked in recognition. "Good evening. Sparkling water again, please?" "Yes, sir," she said, her tone even. They didn't switch to German right away tonight. That was fine. She could wait. Every game had its rhythm, and she was learning theirs. It wasn't until the entrees arrived that the language shifted, the words dropping into German like a secret handshake. She caught phrases: Cayman transfer, patent consolidation, compliance shielding. Each one another nail in the coffin they'd built for her mother's life's work. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't let it show. She floated in and out of the conversation like a shadow, topping up glasses, clearing plates, her ears tuned to every inflection. This was it. The point where grief ended and something else, something sharper, began. She was done being a ghost. By the time they left that night, she had enough to take to Daniel, enough to plant the first seed of the story that could bring Harrison Blackwell's empire down. And as she watched the door close behind them, she felt the line inside her snap. The breaking point wasn't anger, it was clarity. She knew exactly what she had to do next. The Sterling Room's chandeliers bathed the dining hall in a molten gold glow that made everything, polished silver, crystal glasses, even the shadows, feel deliberate. It was the kind of light that flattered power, turning the men who sat beneath it into something larger than life. Maya had spent 3 nights rehearsing what she would say when the moment came. Not to herself in the mirror. She didn't dare risk hearing it aloud, but silently, on the subway rides home, in the grocery store aisles, as she lay in bed listening to the hum of the radiator in her mother's apartment. Each time the words came sharper, more precise, until they felt like a blade she could slide between Harrison Blackwell's ribs without breaking the mask of civility. Tonight, she was ready to use it. Dubois gave her the signal even before the maitre d' whispered the names. Table 12 again. Harrison Blackwell and Graham Vance, this time joined by a third man, a lean, hawk-eyed attorney she recognized from a photo in the Wall Street Journal. She didn't know his name, but she knew the type. The kind of lawyer whose business card might as well say cleaner. Maya adjusted the cuff of her white shirt and picked up the menus. She could feel the old part of herself, the one that hid in the margins, that swallowed her outrage, trying to resurface. She crushed it. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said as she reached the table, her tone perfectly warm, perfectly neutral. Harrison barely glanced up. "Sparkling," he said, as though the word were a command. "Of course." She poured without a tremor. It didn't take long for them to slide into German. Harrison was the first to switch, his voice low but carrying enough for her to catch every word. "The Cayman accounts are ready. After next week, even if the SEC sniffed around, there would be nothing to find." The attorney nodded. "And Project Solstice?" Graham leaned in, his smirk visible even behind his wine glass. "Locked. Angela Johnson's patents will be fully absorbed by the subsidiary by month's end. She won't even know who to sue." Maya felt her pulse rise, but this time she didn't step back. She let herself hover at the edge of their table, collecting empty appetizer plates, aligning silverware with the precision of a jeweler setting stones. And then, in a tone as casual as if she were asking whether they wanted dessert, she said, in flawless Hochdeutsch, "You might want to correct your declension, Mr. Blackwell. It's Würde in that construction, not Würden." The words landed like a dropped glass. Harrison's head snapped toward her. His eyes narrowed, searching her face for some sign he'd misheard. "What did you say?" he asked, in English now, slow, deliberate. Maya met his gaze. "Only that your grammar was off." Then, without breaking eye contact, she switched back to German, the syllables crisp, her consonants as sharp as piano keys. "I wouldn't want your market manipulation plans to be undermined by poor linguistic form." The table went still. The attorney's hand froze midway to his wine glass. Graham's smirk collapsed, replaced by something taut and uncertain. Harrison blinked once, twice, as if recalibrating. "You speak German," he said flatly. "Among other languages," Maya replied. She straightened to her full height, not much taller but enough to erase the deferential bend of a server. "And I also happen to understand the finer points of securities law, market manipulation, false disclosure, insider collusion, all of which I've heard discussed at this very table." Her words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, sending invisible ripples across the room. The nearest diners had gone quiet, their conversation stalling mid-sentence. The pianist, whether by coincidence or instinct, let a phrase hang in the air without resolution. Harrison's jaw tightened. "Careful," he said, his voice low, dangerous. But Maya's voice stayed even. "Careful is for people who are afraid." "I'm not." She placed the last plate on her tray with deliberate care. "My name is Maya Johnson. My mother is Angela Johnson. You destroyed her company. You nearly destroyed her life. And you did it for a quarterly bonus." Graham shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward the briefcase at his feet. "This isn't the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the place," Maya cut in, her voice rising just enough to carry to the next table. "Because you've been hiding in plain sight, counting on the fact that no one here understands your language, but I do. And so will others." The attorney leaned toward Harrison, murmuring something she couldn't catch, but she didn't care. She'd said what needed to be said. Harrison's stare had gone cold, the kind of cold that came from decades of crushing opposition without breaking stride. But behind it she saw something else, a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. "You think you can threaten me?" he said finally. Maya let a thin, humorless smile curve her lips. "I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the truth. And truth has a way of making itself heard, no matter how much money you throw at it." She set the tray against her hip, gave a polite nod as though concluding any other exchange of pleasantries, and stepped away. Behind her, the murmur of the dining room swelled again, but the energy had shifted. People had seen. People had heard. Dubois caught her eye from across the room, his brows raised in a question that was half warning, half admiration. She gave the smallest shake of her head, later, and disappeared into the service station. In the quiet back corner, she let herself take a single, steadying breath. Her hands were trembling now, the delayed aftershock of confrontation. But beneath it all was something fierce and clean. Relief. She had stepped out of the shadows and spoken her mother's name in front of the man who had tried to erase it. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. She didn't want to go back. The silence after her departure from Table 12 was short-lived. By the time Maya returned to the service station, her pulse still humming from the confrontation, Dubois was already there. He looked like a man caught between wanting to scold her and shake her hand. "Maya," he said in that clipped French accent, "what did you just do?" She set the tray down, keeping her voice low but firm. "I told the truth." His eyes searched hers, reading something in her expression that made him hesitate. "Careful," he said finally. But he didn't tell her to apologize. The dinner service rolled on, but something in the air had changed. She could feel eyes on her whenever she stepped onto the floor. The subtle pauses in conversation as diners caught sight of the young black waitress who had dared to speak fluent German to one of the most feared financiers in the city. When she approached Table 12 again, Harrison's gaze was locked on her. The attorney was gone, vanished sometime in the last 10 minutes, leaving only Harrison and Graham, who was fiddling with his cufflinks as though they might rescue him. "Another round?" Maya asked evenly, her hands steady on the water jug. "No," Harrison said. His voice was cool but not as controlled as before. "Sit." She didn't. "If you have something to say to me, Mr. Blackwell, you can say it here. I'm working." He gave a thin smile. "You think you have leverage. You don't. People like you don't win in rooms like this." "People like me?" she repeated, letting the words hang. "You mean people who don't have billion-dollar hedge funds? Or people you thought couldn't understand the difference between mark-to-market valuation and false disclosure?" The term made Graham's head snap up. "You—" "Yes," Maya cut in, her voice gaining volume. "False disclosure. Misleading investors by intentionally publishing inaccurate revenue forecasts. Market manipulation. driving down the stock price of Johnson Aquatech by leaking fabricated defect reports, then using insider collusion to acquire it through a shell subsidiary at a fraction of its value. The words came faster now, her training at Columbia and her rage working in perfect tandem. She spoke like she was back in a seminar, except this time the stakes weren't grades. They were justice. You bribed 2 senior engineers to misrepresent failure rates. You rerouted patent filings through Solstice Holdings Limited, a Cayman-based shell company, to avoid SEC review. And you did it knowing my mother's medical condition made her vulnerable to pressure. She let her voice sharpen on the last sentence. That makes this more than corporate fraud, Mr. Blackwell. That makes it personal. The Sterling room had gone still again. Diners were no longer pretending not to listen. They were openly watching. Someone in the corner had their phone out, not texting, but filming. Harrison's mask of control faltered for the first time. You have no proof. Maya tilted her head, her gaze steady. Not yet, but I know where to find it. And the SEC doesn't need much to open an investigation when insider trading crosses state lines, especially when journalists have already started digging. At the mention of journalists, Graham shifted uncomfortably. That's right, Maya said, her voice lower, but no less clear. Evelyn Carter from the New York Chronicle will be very interested in Project Solstice. I imagine the words pattern of corporate fraud look terrible on the front page, right above your headshot. A ripple of murmurs ran through the dining room. Harrison leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. Do you know how many lawyers I have? Do you know how many people have tried to take me down and failed? Yes, Maya said, her voice calm. But they weren't me, and they didn't have the truth. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Dubois appeared at her side, his face impassive. Gentlemen, he said to Harrison and Graham, perhaps it's best you conclude your evening. It wasn't a request. Harrison stood, his chair scraping against the marble floor. He didn't look at Maya as he adjusted his cufflinks. Enjoy your little performance, he said. But performances end. And when they do, the audience forgets. Not this one, Maya replied. They walked out without another word. The door closed behind them, and the room exhaled in a low tide of conversation. Dubois gave her a long look. That, he said quietly, was either the bravest or the most reckless thing I've ever seen in this room. Maybe both, Maya said. She didn't wait for him to say more. She went to the back, pulled out her phone, and dialed Daniel Vega. It's happening, she told him when he picked up. Blackwell, Project Solstice. I just laid it out in front of 24 witnesses. Someone was filming. I'm sure it's online already. Get ready to move. Daniel swore under his breath. You're sure about this, Maya? Once this is out there, there's no undoing it. I've been sure for 3 years, she said. By the time she left the Sterling room that night, the video was already trending. A shaky clip of her voice, clear and unwavering, naming every offense like a litany. Market manipulation, false disclosure, insider collusion. She knew Harrison would retaliate. She knew the next days would be a storm. But for the first time since that Tuesday in the Columbia Library, she felt like she wasn't drowning. She was swimming towards something, and Harrison Blackwell was the one flailing. And this was only the beginning. For the rest of the night, the Sterling room felt different. Not because of the lighting or the music, it was the atmosphere, the subtle shift in the way people moved and spoke. Waiters stepped lighter, as if wary of stepping into something they didn't understand. Diners, geeks, especially the regulars, kept sneaking glances at Maya. Conversations would go silent for just a moment when she passed, then restart in hurried whispers. It was the first time in 3 years that Maya had been more than a shadow here. In the service station, Clara, one of the newer servers, leaned close and murmured, "I saw the video, Maya. Someone posted it to Instagram before they even left the building. You didn't even flinch." Maya allowed herself a faint smile. "Flinching's for when you don't know what's coming." Clara's eyes were wide. "People are saying you just took on the most powerful man in the city." "Not yet," Maya said, "but soon." She stepped back onto the floor, carrying a tray of desserts for table 5, but her attention was drawn to the far corner. Dubois stood there, watching her with a look she'd never seen from him before, something caught between pride and worry. When she returned to the station, he beckoned her over. "Maya," he said, his tone low and deliberate. "Do you understand what you've done?" "Yes. Blackwell is not the kind of man who forgives public humiliation. I'm not asking for his forgiveness." Dubois studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "The management will ask me what happened tonight. I can tell them you went too far, or I can tell them you acted with integrity. Which one I choose will determine whether you're still working here tomorrow." Maya's pulse slowed, her voice steady. "Then choose the truth, Monsieur Dubois. If that costs me my job, so be it." He tilted his head, as if weighing something invisible. "You remind me of my sister," he said finally. "She once stood in front of a magistrate in Lyon and refused to retract her statement about a corrupt mayor. She lost her job. But a year later, the mayor lost everything." "So which side are you on?" Maya asked. A small smile ghosted across his lips. "Yours." And with that, Dubois stepped out to the floor, moving with the authority of a man who had decided the matter. He clapped his hands once, sharply, to get the staff's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "the Sterling Room prides itself on discretion and excellence. That includes standing by our staff when they speak truth to power." He didn't name names, but everyone knew exactly what he meant. The room broke into polite applause. It wasn't raucous. It was the Sterling Room, after all, but it was enough to send a clear message. At table 5, a regular named Mrs. Kensington called out, "Good for you, young lady." Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. The applause grew, and for the first time since the confrontation, Maya felt the weight in her chest lighten. But then the front doors opened. Harrison Blackwell had returned, alone. The applause faltered and a hush fell. Harrison walked to the center of the room, his gaze fixed on Maya. His expression was unreadable. No fury, no smirk, just a cold assessment. "You think this is over?" he asked, his voice carrying easily. "No," Maya said, meeting his eyes. "I think it's just starting. You have no idea what I can do to you." "Maybe not," she said, "but I know what you've already done, and so does everyone in this room." There was a rustle of movement. Mrs. Kensington standing up from her table, then a man in a tailored gray suit near the bar. Soon half a dozen guests were on their feet. "Mr. Blackwell," Dubois said smoothly, stepping between them, "I must ask you to leave. The Sterling Room does not tolerate intimidation of our staff." "This isn't intimidation," Harrison said, his gaze still locked on Maya. "It's a warning." "Then consider your warning delivered," Dubois replied, his tone like a steel blade sheathed in velvet. "And consider yourself unwelcome here until further notice." The finality in his voice was unmistakable. Harrison's jaw tightened, but he didn't push it. He glanced around the room as if memorizing the faces of those who had stood. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The doors shut behind him with a muted thud. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the applause began again, louder this time, no longer polite, but resolute. Someone near the bar even let out a cheer. Maya stood still, letting the sound wash over her. She didn't bow, didn't smile. She just nodded once to Dubois, who returned the gesture. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a line drawn in the sand. Later, as the staff cleaned up after closing, Clara came over, her eyes still bright. You know, if this was a movie, that would have been the moment everyone decided you were the hero. This isn't a movie, Maya said, wiping down a table. And heroes don't win by applause. She paused, meeting Clara's gaze. They win by finishing what they started. When she finally stepped outside, the city's night air was crisp, cool enough to clear her head. She pulled out her phone and saw a new notification, her name trending on social media, the video from earlier now paired with clips of the confrontation just minutes ago. She knew the fight was about to spill far beyond the walls of the Sterling room. Harrison wouldn't back down, and neither would she. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't standing alone. By sunrise, Maya's face was everywhere. The video from the Sterling room, her voice calm but cutting, naming securities law violations in front of one of New York's most feared financiers, had gone from a shaky phone clip to a full-blown media storm in less than 12 hours. It wasn't just Instagram anymore. The footage had been reposted on Twitter, picked apart on Reddit, stitched into commentary videos on TikTok. Financial blogs were dissecting her allegations line by line, cross-referencing them with public filings and patent records. And on the front page of the New York Chronicle, under a headline that read, "Waitress calls out hedge fund giant in luxury restaurant," was a photo of Maya, standing, tray in hand, eyes locked on Harrison Blackwell like she was ready to cross a courtroom floor. The byline belonged to Evelyn Carter. Maya saw it first from her phone, sitting in the dim light of her mother's small kitchen, the smell of coffee just beginning to rise from the pot. Angela was still asleep in the next room, but the television's morning news segment carried Evelyn's voice into the apartment. What began as a tense exchange in Manhattan's exclusive Sterling room has now sparked public calls for a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation into Blackwell Capital. The allegations center on a project code-named Solstice, a series of acquisitions that may have involved market manipulation, false disclosure, and insider collusion. Maya's phone buzzed again. It was Daniel Vega. "You've just kicked over the biggest hornet's nest on Wall Street," he said when she answered. "Good morning to you too," Maya replied, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "I've been up all night," Daniel continued. "After the clip went viral, Evelyn called me. She's got sources in the SEC who've been waiting for an excuse to look into Blackwell Capital. Between your testimony and what she's digging up, they're already drafting a preliminary brief." Maya leaned against the counter. "That's fast." "That's the power of going public. You didn't just tell them." Daniel paused. "You told everyone." There was a knock at the door. Maya stiffened. "Hold on," she said into the phone. When she opened it, Evelyn Carter was standing there, her coat collar turned up against the morning chill, a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. "Can we talk?" Evelyn asked. Maya hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. They sat at the small kitchen table, the Chronicle front page between them. Evelyn's dark eyes were sharp but not unkind. "You were clear in your statement at the restaurant," Evelyn began, "but if this goes to court, you'll need more than words. You'll need documents, emails, transaction logs." "And I suppose you have an idea where I might find them," Maya said. Evelyn gave a faint smile. "I think you already do." "You said Solstice Holdings looted at the table. That means you've seen something." Maya thought back to the night she'd spotted Graham's briefcase, the file folder just barely visible inside. "I saw paperwork, Cayman subsidiary, Solstice Holdings. If it's real, it's proof of how they rerouted the patents without triggering SEC review." "Then that's what we go after," Evelyn said. "The SEC has subpoena power, but they'll move faster if they have cause. You can give them that cause. Angela's door creaked open. She appeared in her robe, leaning on her cane. "What's all this?" "This is Evelyn Carter," Maya said, rising to help her mother to the table. "She's working on a story." Angela looked from her daughter to Evelyn, and something in her gaze sharpened. "It's about them, isn't it? About what they did to us." Maya took her mother's hand. "Yes, Mom. It's about making it right." Angela's eyes glistened, but she only nodded. Evelyn leaned forward. "If we do this, it won't just be about your family. Blackwell Capital's got a history. Small tech firms, family-owned patents, local inventors. If we pull the thread, I think we'll find more victims." Maya felt the weight of the words settle on her shoulders. She'd started this to reclaim her mother's legacy, but now she could see it was bigger. "I'm in," she said. By mid-afternoon, the internet had turned into an open-source investigation. Anonymous accounts were posting links to shell company registries, tracking board members of Solstice Holdings, even digging into shipping manifests for Blackwell Capital's overseas subsidiaries. Financial Twitter had a new rallying cry, #Solstice Scandal, and then the SEC made it official. A press release hit the wire at 3:17 p.m. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened an investigation into Blackwell Capital regarding allegations of market manipulation, false disclosure, and insider collusion related to Project Solstice. Within minutes, Blackwell Capital's stock began to slide. At first, it was a slow dip, then a steady drop as investors realized this wasn't going away. By market close, the company's value had fallen nearly 12%. Evelyn called Maya that evening. "They're bleeding," she said without preamble. "And they know it." "How do you know?" "Because Graham Vance just issued a statement calling your claims baseless." Evelyn's tone held a note of satisfaction. "Which means they're scared enough to address you directly." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Then we keep going." "Yes," Evelyn said. "We keep going." That night, Maya returned to the Sterling room for her shift. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the difference. Some guests smiled at her openly, offering quiet words of encouragement as she passed. Others, a smaller group, watched her with guarded expressions, weighing whether associating with her might be risky. Dubois intercepted her near the coat check. "The management called," he said. "They've had complaints." Maya raised an eyebrow. "From who?" "Certain clients who are friends of Mr. Blackwell." "Are you firing me?" Dubois gave a slow shake of his head. "Not tonight. You've made this place part of the story now, Maya. And frankly, I think they'd rather be on the right side of it." For the first time in days, she allowed herself to exhale. As she stepped onto the floor, she realized this was no longer just her fight. The story had moved into the bloodstream of the city, through headlines, hashtags, whispered conversations over white tablecloths. And somewhere in a high-rise office, Harrison Blackwell was watching his empire shake. The viral truth was out, and there was no putting it back. The winter wind off the Hudson bit through Maya's coat as she crossed the plaza outside Liberty Ventures. She had been here only once before, years ago, as an intern trailing a Columbia professor for a corporate ethics seminar. Back then, she'd been in awe of the marble lobby, the soaring glass panels, the sense that this was where decisions shaping the future were made. Now she was walking in with the hope of taking part in one of those decisions. Robert Chen, Liberty Ventures' CEO, had reached out through Evelyn Carter 2 days after the SEC investigation into Blackwell Capital was announced. His email had been brief. "I believe in your cause. Let's talk." Security greeted her warmly, another small sign that the tide had shifted, and directed her to the 38th floor. The elevator ride felt long, each floor a silent beat in the rhythm of her thoughts. Her mother's face when she'd told her the SEC was investigating, the viral clip replaying on every news channel. The stock price of Blackwell Capital falling like a stone. Chen's office was large but not ostentatious. Light wood, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the river, and shelves lined with framed photos of community projects in rural America and sub-Saharan Africa. "Maya," he said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm, his eyes bright with focus. "I've read everything, watched every interview. What you did took courage." "It took anger," she said honestly. Courage came later. He smiled faintly and gestured to the chairs. "I wanted to meet because Liberty Ventures has been quietly funding a program for ethical tech acquisitions. We buy innovations from vulnerable inventors before the vultures can gut them. And I believe the patents your mother created belong in that category." Her breath caught. "You want to buy them back?" "Yes," Chen said. "And not to sit on them. To restore Johnson Aquatech's name. Develop the technology under its original mission, affordable, sustainable water filtration for underserved communities." For a moment, Maya couldn't speak. She'd imagined this possibility in quiet, private moments for years, but hearing it out loud felt almost dangerous, like wishing too hard on a star. "There's one catch," Chen continued. "Blackwell Capital still holds the patents through Solstice Holdings. We can't buy them unless they're willing or forced to sell." "Then we force them," Maya said without hesitation. Chen's smile deepened. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Over the next week, Evelyn's reporting grew sharper, drilling down into transaction records, internal memos leaked by nervous employees, and court filings from other victims of Blackwell Capital. Daniel provided data tracing the movement of patent ownership through shell companies, mapping every transfer like a spider web. With each new revelation, the pressure on Blackwell increased. The SEC froze certain accounts pending investigation. 2 board members resigned for personal reasons. And then, in a move no one expected, a mid-level compliance officer at Blackwell came forward with an encrypted drive containing email threads, meeting notes, and the original valuation reports for Johnson Aquatech. The numbers were damning. The reports showed that Blackwell Capital had deliberately suppressed the true market value of Angela Johnson's patents by 63% before acquisition. Chen's legal team moved quickly, filing an injunction to block Blackwell from licensing the patents until the investigation concluded. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. On the day of the hearing, Maya sat beside Chen in the crowded federal courtroom. Across the aisle, Harrison Blackwell's legal team looked polished and unshakable, but Harrison himself seemed diminished. The confident, untouchable figure from the Sterling Room was gone, replaced by a man whose empire was bleeding from too many cuts at once. When the judge asked for opening remarks, Chen's attorney stood. "Your Honor, the patents in question are not merely assets. They are the legacy of an inventor whose work was hijacked through fraud and manipulation. The evidence shows clear violations of SEC regulations, including market manipulation, false disclosure, and insider collusion." Blackwell's lead counsel objected, claiming the investigation was ongoing and that the allegations were unsubstantiated media narratives. But the judge allowed the hearing to proceed. Evelyn was there in the gallery, notebook in hand. She caught Maya's eye and gave a small, encouraging nod. The compliance officer's testimony was the turning point. He described, in careful detail, the internal pressure to produce falsified defect reports and the direct orders from Graham Vance to bury the Johnson patents deep enough no one could dig them up. When Chen's attorney introduced the encrypted drive into evidence, the courtroom went still. By the end of the day, the judge issued a temporary order. Blackwell Capital was prohibited from selling, licensing, or otherwise profiting from the patents until the SEC completed its investigation. More importantly, the judge signaled a willingness to revisit ownership if fraud was proven, a signal to Blackwell's investors that the patents were now a liability. 3 days later, Chen called Maya into his office again. "He's selling," Chen said simply. "Blackwell needs liquidity to cover the damage, and the patents are the fastest way to get it. We negotiated a fraction of their original value, but far more than he deserves." Maya felt her knees go weak. "It's really happening?" "It's really happening," Chen said. "Johnson Aquatech will be reborn as a division of Liberty Ventures, and we'd like you to lead it." She shook her head in disbelief. "I'm not a CEO." "Neither was your mother when she started," Chen said. "You have her vision, her fight, and now, her legacy." When Maya left Liberty Ventures that evening, the sun was setting over the Hudson, painting the water in gold. She called her mother from the sidewalk, her voice breaking as she said, "Mom, we got it back. It's ours again." Angela didn't speak for a moment, and when she did, her voice was soft but strong. "You've done more than bring it back, Maya. You've made sure no one can take it from us again." For the first time in years, Maya felt the weight of loss shift, still present, but no longer crushing. The patents were more than papers filed in a registry. They were proof that her mother's work, her family's name, and their place in the world had been restored. And for the first time since that Tuesday in the Columbia Library, Maya allowed herself to believe in a future where the Johnson name stood for something unshakable. The Sterling Room looked exactly as it had the night Maya first saw Harrison Blackwell walk in. The same golden chandeliers, the same polished silver, the same low hum of conversations in a dozen different accents. But tonight, everything was different. She was here as a guest. Dubois had insisted on arranging the reservation himself, and not at just any table. It was table 12, the corner alcove, the one shielded by tall palms, the one where Harrison had once sat and plotted the dismantling of her mother's life's work. Now, the leather banquette was hers. She wore a black silk dress with a subtle sheen, the kind of thing she used to imagine on the other side of the room while carrying trays. Her hair was loose for the first time in years, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. The maitre d' greeted her by name, offering a bow as he pulled out her chair. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat her mother, Angela Johnson, in a tailored navy jacket that brought out the warmth in her skin. Her posture was still aided by a cane, but her presence radiated strength. "I never thought I'd sit here," Angela said softly, running her fingertips over the edge of the white linen tablecloth. Maya smiled. "Neither did I." "But we've earned it." The server arrived, a young black woman with bright eyes and the same careful grace Maya remembered cultivating when she'd worked here. Maya caught her name tag, Danielle. "Welcome to the Sterling Room," Danielle said, her voice carrying just a hint of nerves. Maya glanced up at her and smiled warmly. "Thank you. And Danielle, take your time. This is a good table to remember." Danielle blinked, surprised, and smiled back. The menus were presented, the wine poured. Dubois himself appeared briefly, impeccably dressed to welcome them. "You honor us tonight, Madame Johnson, Mademoiselle Maya," he said, his French accent curling around the syllables. "It seems the city knows your story, and so do we." Angela's smile was small but genuine. "You stood by my daughter when she could have been silenced. That's something I won't forget." After Dubois departed, Maya let herself look around the room. She recognized some of the faces, bankers, art dealers, political aides, and she knew that some of them knew exactly who she was, that they were watching her sit where Harrison Blackwell once ruled. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about presence. She had taken up space in a room that had once rendered her invisible. Halfway through the meal, a shadow fell over their table. Maya looked up to find Graham Vance standing there, a hesitant smile on his face. His tie was looser than she'd ever seen it, and there was something in his eyes. Less arrogance, more uncertainty. "Maya," he said quietly, "I wanted to say, I'm sorry." Angela's gaze sharpened, but Maya's expression stayed even. "Sorry for what, Graham? For what you said? For what you did? Or for getting caught?" He swallowed. "All of it. I left Blackwell Capital. I've been thinking about what you said. About the truth. I don't know if I can undo what I did, but I want to try." For a moment, Maya said nothing. She studied him, searching for the sincerity beneath the words. She saw enough to give him one chance, and only one. "Then start by helping someone who can't help themselves," she said. "Not for credit, not for a headline, just because it's right." He nodded. "I will." And then he left as quietly as he had come. Angela exhaled slowly. "Do you believe him?" Maya shook her head. "I don't have to. If he's serious, his actions will prove it." By dessert, dark chocolate soufflé, the same dish Harrison had eaten the night she'd first confronted him, the room felt lighter, not because anything had been forgotten, but because so much had been reclaimed. When Danielle brought the bill, Maya slipped a thick envelope inside the folio before handing it back. "That's a very large tip," Angela murmured, eyebrows lifting. Maya smiled. "Consider it an investment. Someone once gave me the courage to stand up in this room. Maybe this will give Danielle hers." They left the Sterling room together, stepping out into the cool night air of Park Row. The city pulsed around them, traffic lights changing, the sound of tires on wet pavement, a saxophone wailing faintly from a subway entrance. Maya paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the restaurant's glowing windows. There was no more shadow to hide in, no more ghost of Park Row. Her mother's legacy was hers now, not just the patents, but the fight to protect them. Liberty Ventures' new Johnson Aquatech division was already partnering with nonprofits to install water filtration systems in underserved communities, both in the U.S. and abroad. And Maya had a seat at every table that mattered, not because she'd been invited, but because she'd claimed it. She took her mother's arm. "Ready to go home?" Angela nodded, her smile warm. "Home sounds perfect." They walked into the night, the lights of Manhattan stretching ahead like a promise. And somewhere deep inside, Maya knew this was more than an ending. It was the beginning of everything her mother had dreamed of, restored, renewed, and impossible to erase. And that's how Maya Johnson, once a shadow in the corner of Park Row, took back her mother's legacy, reclaimed her place in the world, and proved that truth can stand taller than money or fear. From the moment she overheard that first whispered plan in German to the night she sat at table 12 as an honored guest, Maya's journey was a reminder that courage isn't loud at the start. It grows with every step you refuse to take backward. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. Your time means everything, and I hope Maya's fight and her healing have left something warm in your heart. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button so we can share more stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you long after they're told. We'll see you in the next one.